The first time I saw him was through a haze of pain and exhaustion. Blood ran down my face, mixing with the icy rain that had been pouring relentlessly for hours. Thunder roared overhead as I pushed open the barn door, my knees finally giving out under the weight of my injured body. The smell of fresh hay and old wood was the last thing I registered before darkness swallowed me. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get more stories like this. My name is Ethan Reeves. I'm 34 years old. For almost a decade, I was the pastor of a small congregation in Ohio, until my life unraveled on one spring Sunday. They found out about Jacob, a young deacon with whom I shared way more than Bible study. In a matter of hours, I lost my church, my community, and my identity. Now, 3 years later, I am just a wandering carpenter driving along the back roads of rural Pennsylvania, carrying my tools and my secrets. The irony never gets past me. A man who once preached about belongingness now has no place to call home. The old pickup I bought with my savings was my only constant companion. Every morning started the same way, waking up with the first ray of sunlight, warming up some coffee on my camping stove, and reading a few pages from the worn Bible I still carried. Not out of obligation, but as a reminder that faith and dogma are not the same thing. My days were filled with odd jobs, fixing fences, restoring old furniture, or helping out on construction sites. The nights were the hardest. Sitting alone under the stars, I'd write in my journal, trying to make sense of the man I was becoming. I often watched Amish families from afar in their buggies, their lives seeming so simple and orderly, even though I knew that outward simplicity rarely reflects the complexity of the human heart. That fateful afternoon, the storm hit without warning. The dirt road turned to mud under my tires, and my attempt to swerve around a fallen branch ended with the pickup stuck in a ditch. The impact threw me against the steering wheel, opening a deep gash above my eyebrow. With the storm roaring on and no sign of help nearby, I caught sight of a barn outlined a few fields away. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right away. When I came to, it felt like I was floating. A face hung over me. Young, with delicate features framed by straight-cut brown hair, the traditional Amish style. Blue eyes studied me with a mix of fear and compassion. "Can you hear me?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper. I tried to answer, but my throat was too dry. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a mug of fresh water. His hands were strong and calloused from farm work, yet he helped me drink with surprising kindness. "My name is Connor," he said, nervously glancing at the door. "You're on an Amish property. My father can't know you're here. At least, not yet." "Ethan," I managed to murmur. "I'm sorry for intruding. The storm, my car." "Rest now," he replied, placing a damp cloth on my injured forehead. "I'll be back at dawn." Over the next 3 days, Connor showed up twice a day, before sunrise and after the family dinner, when he could leave without raising suspicions. He brought food wrapped in clean cloths, fresh water, and occasionally, some medicinal herbs for my wounds. We talked little at first. I was cautious. He was naturally shy, and his English came out a bit hesitant, quite different from the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect he used with his family. On the third morning, while I was changing my bandages, I noticed how he watched my hands as I worked on a piece of wood I had started carving to pass the time. "You work wood well," he commented, curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. "I'm a carpenter," I replied. "I can teach you, if you want." His face lit up for a moment before he went back to his cautious expression. "You shouldn't be here talking with an Englishman. That's the word the Amish use for outsiders. And yet, here you are," I replied with a slight smile. From that moment on, something changed between us. Connor began lingering longer. Between his chores on the farm, he would escape to the barn, where he slowly learned the craft of wood carving. I discovered he was 21, the youngest of 4 brothers, and he had never left the county. His world was limited by the property fence and by the strict traditions of the Amish. "I've always wanted to see the ocean," he confessed one afternoon as we worked in silence side by side. "Is it true that the water goes on as far as the eye can see?" I described to him the beaches of California, the waves crashing against cliffs, the endless horizon where sky and water merge. His eyes sparkled with every word, as if he could see the images I was painting. "How was your rumspringa?" I asked one day, referring to the period when Amish youth can explore the outside world before deciding to commit to community life. His face darkened. "I never left. My father said it was better to stay and learn more about our faith." He paused, his fingers absent-mindedly stroking the wood he was carving. Sometimes, I think that I lost my only chance to see the world. With every conversation, I uncovered deeper layers in Connor. Beneath the simple appearance of an Amish boy, there was a restless spirit, a curious mind silently questioning the strict limitations imposed by tradition. He told me that his older brother had left the community years ago, becoming an outcast, someone they could no longer speak to or acknowledge. "My mother still cries for him some nights," Connor said. "How can God want us to reject those we love?" It was a question I myself had asked 1,000 times since my excommunication. My strength was slowly returning, and with it, the realization that I would have to leave soon. Connor had mentioned that his father, Patrick, had started questioning his frequent visits to the barn. The tension was palpable when he arrived with fresh bruises on his arms, the result of increasing confrontations at home. "He says I'm changing," Connor murmured one afternoon, his eyes fixed on his hands. "That I ask questions I shouldn't. That I don't seem interested in the young women in the community like I should be." At that moment, I felt a pang in my chest, a mix of recognition and fear. It was like looking at my own reflection years ago, the same internal struggle and unanswered questions. "What do you want, Connor?" I asked softly. He looked up at me, raw vulnerability in his eyes. "I want to understand why I feel so different, why I never fit in, even though I was born here." That afternoon, Connor showed me a hiding place where he kept forbidden books, a few worn novels, an old atlas with markings of places he dreamed of visiting, and surprisingly, a modern English Bible he read in secret to form his own interpretations. "My father says that thinking for yourself is pride," he said, "that we should accept what the elders teach without question." "And what do you think?" I asked while leafing through his secret stash. "I think God gave me a mind to use," he replied with a conviction I hadn't seen before, "and a heart to feel things I can't explain." On the 5th night of my stay, a storm even more violent than the first shook the barn. Connor had visited earlier, bringing a slice of pie his mother had baked and some clean clothes. When the rain began to fall hard, I thought I wouldn't see him again that night. I was wrong. A little after 10, the barn door opened and Connor stepped in, soaked to the bone, trembling not just from the cold, but from something deeper. His face was wet with fresh tears, mixed with raindrops. "My father found my books," he said, his voice breaking. "He said I'm under the influence of evil, that tomorrow the bishop will come to counsel me." I instinctively got up, grabbing the blanket I used to cover him. His breathing was uneven, his eyes lost in some far-off point, like a trapped animal. "He asked if I'd picked up on any strange ideas," Connor continued. "If someone was putting ideas into my head." "Does he suspect me of being here?" I asked, already calculating how long it would take to gather my things and leave in the dark. "I don't know," Connor answered, finally meeting my gaze. "But he said something I can't forget. He said he always knew there was something wrong with me since I was a kid, that my interest in books and questions was just a symptom of a deformity in my soul." Those words hit a raw nerve inside me, the very same accusations that had been thrown at me by people claiming to speak for God. I saw in Connor the same pain, the same inner struggle between accepting what others told him about himself and the truth he felt in his heart. "There's nothing wrong with you, Connor," I said more forcefully than I intended. "Nothing." "How can you be so sure?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of thunder. "Because I've been where you are now," I replied, making a decision that could change everything. "And because I know the cost of living a life based on other people's expectations instead of your own truth." Then, for the first time since we met, I told him my whole story, how I had tried to repress my true nature for years, how I became a pastor in the hope that enough devotion might fix me, how I eventually found genuine love only to lose it along with everything else that mattered. Connor listened in silence, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, the barn fell into a profound silence, the storm having passed while we talked, as if nature itself wanted to listen to our conversation. "That's why I feel this way around you," he finally said, the words coming out as if freed from a prison. I never knew how to name this feeling before. The conflict in his eyes was palpable, the fear of decades of conditioning clashing with a truth newly discovered. I found myself at a dangerously familiar crossroads, knowing that anything I said now could influence the course of his life. "Connor, I can't tell you what to do," I replied carefully. "Your journey is yours alone. I can only say that no matter which path you choose, you deserve to live without shame for what you feel." The tension in the air was almost physical, charged with unspoken possibilities. The lantern cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls, creating a separate world from what lay outside. a space where normal rules seemed to be suspended. "I never really belonged here," Connor whispered, more to himself than to me. "But I also don't know if I belong anywhere else." "Belonging isn't about a place," I replied. "It's about finally finding peace with who you really are." Something changed in his gaze then, a resolution taking shape. Connor stepped closer, closing the safe space we had maintained between us over these days. His hand, hesitant but determined, touched my face, his fingers delicately tracing the scar that was just beginning to form above my eyebrow. Connor's touch on my face was like a live ember, cautious but loaded with intention. His fingers traced the outline of the scar above my eyebrow, slowly moving down to my temple. The whole barn seemed to hold its breath. Only the occasional whinny of horses in the distant stalls and the drip of rain on the roof broke the silence that surrounded us. "I've never touched anyone like this," he confessed, his voice almost inaudible. The golden light of the lantern danced on his face, highlighting delicate features that contrasted so much with his rough, farm-worn hands. "It's forbidden to feel what I feel." I stayed still, aware of the decisive moment unfolding. Every second carried the weight of possible consequences. For him, much more serious than for me. "Connor," I whispered, my voice rough, "we need to be sure. The world out there doesn't easily forgive men like us." A late flash of lightning briefly lit the inside of the barn through the gaps between the boards, bathing us in silvery light. In that fleeting moment, I saw something shift in Connor's gaze, a subtle transformation from doubt to determination. "I'm 21, he answered, his voice growing firmer. "I've spent every day of these years following rules that never made sense to my heart, reading in secret, dreaming in secret, praying in secret to a God who might not hate me as they say he should." His hand moved down to rest on my chest, right where my heart pounded erratically. For the first time, something feels real. The lantern flickered as a cold breeze swept through the barn, sending long shadows dancing on the wooden walls. Suddenly, we were nothing more than two indistinct silhouettes, two men stripped of external identities, of complicated pasts, of uncertain futures. "I don't want you to regret this," I murmured, still fighting the impulse to close the gap between us. A nearly imperceptible smile touched his lips. "The only regret would be to keep pretending, to live a lifetime in silence." At that moment, the final barriers between us crumbled. Connor leaned in, closing the distance that separated us. His lips met mine with the hesitation of a first discovery, but also with the urgency of something long repressed finally set free. The kiss was like diving into unknown waters, scary and liberating at the same time. His hands, which had been tense on my chest at first, gradually relaxed, moving up to my shoulders, my neck, my face. Mine found his waist, feeling the rough fabric of his homemade shirt. When we pulled apart, both breathless, I saw silent tears streaming down Connor's face. For a terrifying moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake, but then he smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes in a way I had never seen before. "So that's it," he murmured, awed. "Is this what the poems try to describe?" I couldn't help but smile in response. "Do you read poetry in secret too?" "Whitman," he admitted, blushing. "I found a torn volume under the barn floor years ago. I never completely understood it until now." At that moment, I was certain that Connor had read far more of the world than his community could imagine. There was a singular mind behind those eyes, a soul that refused to be contained by the limitations imposed on him. "You're extraordinary," I said, the words slipping out before I could hold them back. His cheeks flushed even more under his sparse beard. "I'm just a farm boy." "No," I disagreed, touching his face. "You're brave. Many live their whole lives without the courage you showed tonight." Our lips met again, this time with more confidence. Connor's hands, once shy, now explored with growing curiosity. Every touch was like a silent confession, every sigh a wordless prayer. The hay beneath us formed an unlikely bed, but that night it seemed more sacred than any altar I had ever known. Our clothes were slowly removed, each button, each fold of fabric revealing new truths. Connor's body was a landscape of contrasts, the pale skin where the sun never reached contrasting with the tanned face and arms, scars from hard work mixed with the softness of youth. "I never imagined," he whispered against my skin, words broken up by kisses. "I never knew I could feel this much." That night unfolded like a continuous revelation. In the simplicity of that barn, we discovered each other's complexities. Connor, in his first experience of true intimacy, showed a surprising delicacy, mixed with an insatiable curiosity. Every touch, every whisper, every movement transformed the space around us. The lantern kept burning low, casting our unified shadow on the barn wall. Two forms made one. The smell of fresh hay and the earthy aroma of old wood enveloped us like a blanket, while the warmth of our bodies defied the persistent chill of the night. Our bodies moved as if in a newly found harmony. What Connor lacked in experience, he made up for with devotion and attention. He followed my every reaction like a map to uncharted territories. When we finally became one completely, it was like the meeting of two souls that had been searching for each other through time. "Ethan," he whispered my name like a prayer, his eyes fixed on mine as we moved together. "Is this a sin?" I looked deeply into his eyes, seeing vulnerability, trust, and something deeper. How can something that brings so much light into the darkness be sinful? My answer seemed to satisfy him. His body relaxed completely against mine, surrendering to the moment with total abandon. We moved together at a pace that seemed as old as time itself, while the outside world faded away beyond the barn walls. The climax came like a wave crashing onto the shore. Inevitable, powerful, transformative. Connor buried his face in my neck to stifle the sound of his pleasure, while I held his back firmly, anchoring him as his body trembled against mine. I held him as waves of ecstasy coursed through his body, feeling his ragged breathing against my skin. Moments later, my own release hit me with overwhelming force, intense enough to momentarily silence all coherent thoughts. When the storm inside us finally calmed, we lay intertwined in the hay, skin against skin, heart against heart. The lantern had nearly burned out, its weak flame creating a small circle of yellowish light around us. Outside the barn, the night had lightened, and through the gaps between the boards, I could see stars dotting the once tempestuous sky. Connor rested partly on my chest, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on my skin. "Is it always like this?" he asked, his voice sounding different now, deeper, more assured. "No," I answered honestly, stroking his hair. "What we just shared is rare. It's special." He nodded against my chest as if confirming something he'd long suspected. "That's why the elders fear this so much. Because once it's discovered, there's no turning back." The wisdom in his words surprised me. For someone so isolated from the world, Connor had a deep, intuitive understanding of human nature. "I think so," I agreed. "True love is revolutionary. It defies established orders." "Love," he repeated the word as if experiencing it for the first time. "Is that what we feel?" "What do you think?" I asked, not wanting to impose my definitions on his experience. Connor fell silent for a long moment, his breathing deepening as he considered the question. "I think love must be this. When you finally find someone with whom you can be completely who you are without hiding anything." The simplicity and depth of his definition moved me. So many theologians, philosophers, and poets have tried to capture the essence of love, and here was this young Amish boy articulating it with crystal clear clarity. "Yes," I whispered, holding him closer. "I think you got it perfectly." We lay together in comfortable silence for a while, simply existing in the little haven we'd created. Eventually, Connor lifted his head, his gaze meeting mine. "What happens now?" he asked, reality beginning to seep back into our bubble of intimacy. The question hung between us like a heavy cloud. What would happen now? I was almost healed from my injuries, and I no longer had a reason to stay. Connor would face the bishop tomorrow, his secret stash of books discovered, his transgressions suspected. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I do know that this moment changed something fundamental in me." Connor nodded, resting his head again on my chest. "In me too." Slowly, the sky outside the barn began to lighten, the dark blue of night giving way to the pearly gray of dawn. The reality of sunrise was approaching relentlessly. "I need to leave before they wake," Connor finally said, reluctantly pulling away from me. I watched him get dressed, transforming back into the young Amish man the world knew. His simple clothes and straw hat concealed the man I had come to know so intimately just moments before. There was something deeply melancholic in that transformation, as if I were witnessing his return to a self-imposed prison. "Connor," I called out as he was about to leave. "Do you regret it?" He stopped at the barn door, his silhouette framed by the first light of day. For an agonizing moment, he didn't answer. Then he turned partially, his profile visible against the brightening sky. "How could I regret finally feeling complete?" he replied, a slight smile touching his lips. "I'll be back later. I promise." With that, he left, disappearing into the morning mist that hung over the fields. I lay in the hay, contemplating the barn's ceiling as the daylight grew stronger. My thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Elation over the connection we'd shared, worry for Connor and the consequences he might face, guilt for potentially complicating his already difficult situation. For the first time in 3 years, since my excommunication, I felt the full weight of the responsibility that comes with living authentically. It wasn't just my life that was at stake now, it was Connor's as well. I finally got up and dressed slowly. My muscles ached, partly from the unusual night of activity, partly from the wounds that were still healing. I walked over to the small barn window, watching the Amish property come to life with the sunrise. In the distance, I could see the farmhouse, a simple rectangular structure painted white with dark curtains in the windows. Smoke began to rise from the chimney, signaling the start of the morning routines. Closer to the barn, chickens started pecking the ground for food, and cows softly mooed as they waited for milking. It was a scene of pastoral simplicity, a way of life practically unchanged for centuries. There was undeniable beauty in this continuity, in the dedication to ancestral traditions. But there was also a rigidity that could crush spirits that didn't quite fit the established mold. Hours passed as I took care of small tasks, organizing my few belongings, working on another wood sculpture, planning my eventual departure. At noon, the sun shone brightly, dispelling the last traces of the previous night's storm. That's when I heard voices approaching the barn. I quickly hid in the hayloft among stacked bales that concealed me from view, but allowed me to watch the entrance through small openings. The barn door opened, and 2 men walked in. One of them was Connor, the other an older man I immediately recognized as his father, Patrick. "And these blasphemous ideas need to be stripped from your head," Patrick said, his voice deep and stern. "The bishop is deeply concerned. Everyone is." Connor kept his eyes down, submissive in appearance, but I noticed the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I know you've been spending time in this barn beyond what's necessary," Patrick continued, looking around as if searching for evidence of something forbidden. "What are you doing here for so long?" "I'm working, Dad," Connor replied, his voice controlled. "I'm fixing tools, taking care of the animals." Patrick walked through the barn, inspecting every corner. My heart pounded in my chest as his footsteps neared the ladder leading up to the hayloft where I was hiding. "There's something different about you these past few weeks," Patrick said, stopping near the pile of hay where I had slept. "Your mother noticed it too. You no longer sing while you work. You seem distant during prayers. Your eyes look different." "I'm just tired," Connor answered. "This year's harvest has been demanding." Patrick abruptly turned, staring at his son. "Don't lie to me, son. It's worse than any other sin." I saw Connor shudder slightly at the words, but he kept his composure. "I'm not lying, Dad. I'm thinking a lot lately." "Thinking?" repeated Patrick, the words sounding like an accusation. "About what?" Connor hesitated, and for a terrible moment I thought he would confess everything. Instead, he answered, "About my place in the world, about what God really expects from us." Patrick sighed heavily, a mixture of frustration and sadness on his weathered, outdoor-worn face. "These are dangerous questions, Connor. They led your brother away from God, from us. I can't lose another son to the world." The mention of his missing brother seemed to hit Connor hard. For a brief moment, his mask of calm faltered, revealing the underlying pain. "Matthew made his choice," Patrick said, his voice now softer. "I still pray every night that he finds his way back. But you, Connor, you were always the sensitive one, the dreamer. I fear for your soul more than anyone else's." "Dad," Connor began, his voice trembling. What if some people just don't fit the path that others have set for them?" Patrick stood motionless, studying his son with renewed intensity. "Is that what you think? That our path is just one option among many? That the rules we've followed for generations are arbitrary?" "No, that's not what I mean." Connor backed off, realizing he'd gone too far. "I just think that sometimes it's hard to understand why some things are considered wrong." "Like what?" Patrick questioned, stepping towards his son. "What specific things are you questioning, Connor?" The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken possibilities. I could see Connor struggling internally, choosing his words carefully, aware of the edge he was nearing. Things like, he hesitated, weighing his words. Why certain people are cast out. Why some forms of love are forbidden. Patrick's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Love? What kind of love are you talking about, son?" I held my breath in my hiding place, feeling we were heading for a decisive moment. Connor seemed on the verge of a revelation that would change his life irrevocably. But at that critical moment, a loud neigh came from one of the horses in the stalls, breaking the tension. Patrick got distracted, turning his attention to the animal. "I need to go back, boys," he said, after checking on the horse. "Your mother is making lunch. The bishop will come tomorrow to talk to you." He walked to the door, pausing briefly. "Connor, remember that we're different from the world for a reason. Our separation is our strength. Our obedience is our salvation." With those words, Patrick left, leaving Connor alone in the barn. As soon as his father's footsteps were far enough away, Connor collapsed onto a bale of hay, his whole body trembling. I quickly climbed down from the loft and moved to his side. He looked up as I approached, silent tears streaming down his face. "He knows," Connor whispered. "Maybe not exactly what, but he feels that something's changed in me." I sat down beside him, keeping a respectful distance, aware that anyone could walk into the barn at any moment. "What will happen tomorrow?" I asked. "With the bishop?" Connor wiped the tears away with the sleeve of his shirt. "He'll try to guide me back to the right path. He'll make me confess my sins. He'll ask me to repent." "And will you do that?" His eyes met mine, a new determination glimmering through the tears. How can I repent for the only moment in my life when I truly felt alive? The rest of that day passed like a fever dream. Connor went back home to avoid further suspicions, and I remained in the barn, alternating between preparing to leave and contemplating the unthinkable, taking Connor with me. The idea was both liberating and terrifying. What kind of life could I offer someone who had never seen the world beyond this isolated community? What right did I have to rip him away from everything he knew? When night finally fell, I began to organize my few belongings. My heart felt as heavy as lead, but my mind was clear. I couldn't stay and risk putting Connor in further danger. My presence would only complicate his life, potentially destroying it irreparably. The bishop's visit the next day could be the turning point for his future in this community. The stars were shining brightly when the barn door opened quietly. Connor entered, moving with a deliberate caution that immediately alerted me. His eyes were red but dry, as if he'd cried every tear he had. "My father is watching the house tonight," he whispered, coming closer. I had to wait until he fell asleep. I noticed he was carrying a small bundle of cloth, tied with simple rope. My heart raced as I realized what it meant. "Connor," I began, uncertain how to put everything I needed to say into words. "I'm leaving tonight." "I know," he replied, surprising me. "I noticed this morning that you started getting ready." A heavy silence fell between us. So many unspoken words, so many unexplored possibilities. "I can't stay here and risk causing more trouble for you," I finally explained. "Your life is complicated enough without me." Connor stood still, his face partly hidden by the shadows of the barn. "And where are you going?" he asked, his voice controlled on purpose. "North, probably. I have an old friend in Vermont who might be able to offer me some work for a while." He nodded slowly, digesting the information. "And then?" I shrugged, feeling the familiar weight of uncertainty, my only constant all these years. "I keep moving. That's what I do now." Connor came closer, stepping into the soft circle of light cast by the lantern. His face showed a determination I hadn't seen before, his youthful features hardened by some inner resolve. "Take me with you," he said simply. Those words hovered between us, heavy with implication. My first instinct was to protect him from himself, from a decision that would irrevocably change the course of his life. "Connor, you don't understand what you're asking," I replied gently. "Your family, your community, your faith, all of it would be left behind. Forever." "Do you think I don't know that?" There was an uncommon firmness in his voice. "I've been considering leaving long before you came into our lives." I studied his face in the flickering light, searching for any sign of doubt. "Then why now? Why not before?" "Because before, I only had questions. Now I have certainty." He stepped even closer, closing the gap between us. "The certainty that there's a world where I can exist without constantly pretending, where I can love you or someone else without shame. Life out there isn't easy for people like us," I warned. "There's prejudice, rejection, sometimes even violence." "And is it any different here?" Connor shot back. "The only difference is that here, the violence is silent. It takes place in the mind, in the soul. It's the violence of denying who we really are until there's nothing left but an empty shell." His words hit me hard, echoing my own experience after years of trying to conform to what others deemed acceptable. "If I stay," he continued, The bishop will talk to me tomorrow. He'll try to purify me. He'll force me to confess my sins and repent. Eventually, they'll find a suitable young woman for me. I'll have children. I'll grow old teaching them the same rules that imprisoned me. I'll die without ever having truly lived. The picture he painted was bleak in its likely accuracy. I knew that path of self-denial all too well. I had tried to follow it until it became unsustainable. "What do you see if you come with me?" I asked, needing to know if he understood the magnitude of what he was considering. Connor took a deep breath. His eyes locked on mine. "I see uncertainty, challenges, an unknown road." A small smile curled on his lips. "But I also see possibility. Freedom to discover who I really am, not just who I was told to be. The chance to love, you or someone else, without shame." His words carried a maturity that surprised me once again. It wasn't reckless youth or a moment of rebellion. It was a conscious choice born from years of silent reflection. "I'm not asking for promises," Connor clarified, as if reading my thoughts. "I'm not expecting us to build a life together on a few nights in a barn. I know we barely know each other. But you showed me a truth about myself that I can't ignore any longer, and for that, I'll be forever grateful." A lump formed in my throat at his disarming honesty. "What exactly are you asking for then?" "One chance," he replied simply. "An open door instead of a wall. An opportunity to discover the world beyond these fields. And if our paths eventually diverge, so be it. But I can't stay here knowing what I know now." I looked at the small bundle he carried. Everything he considered important enough to take on his escape. Probably a few books, maybe a family keepsake, some articles of clothing. An entire life reduced to a package that could be carried in one hand. "Your family will suffer," I said softly, needing to be sure he had thought through all the consequences. A flash of pain crossed his face. "Yes, like when Matthew left. They'll pray for my soul. Maybe even hold a symbolic funeral, like they did for him." His voice faltered slightly. "But if I stay, I'll suffer a slower, more painful death, the death of my true self." I realized then that he didn't need me to save him. He wasn't a naive kid seeking a romantic escape. He was a man making a deliberate choice about his own life, and he was simply asking me to open the door. "If that's truly what you want," I finally said, "I'll leave at dawn and wait along the line of trees past the eastern field. If you decide to come, I'll be there." Connor nodded, accepting the terms. "And if I don't show up, then I'll go on my way, knowing you made the choice you believed was best for you." He came closer, erasing the safe distance that had been between us, and gently rested his hand on my face. "Thank you for giving me that choice. No one has ever offered me that before." We parted with a kiss, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Unlike last night's passion, this was gentle, almost solemn. A silent agreement, a promise without guarantees. "Until tomorrow," said Connor as he left, and I noticed he stated it as a fact, not as a question. After he left, I finished my preparations. I packed my backpack efficiently. 3 years of living on the road had taught me the value of simplicity. Before sleeping, I carved a small piece of wood, a bird with open wings, leaving it in the hay as a farewell gift in case Connor decided to stay. Sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by dreams in which I ran across endless fields, always chased by something nameless. I woke before the first ray of sunshine, the barn still immersed in darkness. I got dressed quickly, feeling the cold morning air seep through my clothes. With my backpack on and my carpentry tools in hand, I took one last look at the barn that had been my sanctuary. So many things had changed in that simple space. I arrived as a wounded stranger. I was leaving as a transformed man. The morning mist enveloped the property as I left quietly. The world hung between night and day, that magical moment when anything seems possible. I walked cautiously through the fields, avoiding the farmhouse, heading for the line of trees that marked the property's edge. When I reached the safety of the trees, I found a fallen log and sat down to wait. The sun began its slow ascent, dispelling the fog and revealing the world in ever sharper detail. The Amish farm was slowly waking up, smoke rising from the chimney, the distant sound of animals. Minutes stretched on like hours. Every sound made me look hopefully toward the field, only to see it was just the wind stirring the wheat or a bird taking flight. Gradually, the sun climbed higher in the sky. 1 hour passed, then another. Connor wasn't coming. The realization slowly sunk in, like a stone dropping into deep water. Maybe he'd rethought it during the night. Maybe the bonds with his family were too strong to break. Maybe he'd simply realized the madness it would be to leave everything behind for an uncertain road with a stranger. It was a sensible, rational decision. Likely better for him. The life I led wasn't for the faint of heart. Always on the move. Always an outsider. Carrying visible and invisible scars. Just as I was about to venture deeper into the woods, something caught my attention in the golden field. A lone figure was walking hastily toward me, moving determinedly through the tall wheat. My heart raced as I recognized Connor. He was walking barefoot, carrying the small bundle and nothing more. His face carried a mix of exhaustion and resolve, like someone who'd spent the entire night in an internal conflict. I remained still in the shade of the trees, giving him until the very last moment a chance to change his mind. But his steps never faltered. When he finally reached the forest's edge, his eyes met mine, and I saw fresh tears in them. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said softly. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "I sat by my mother's bed while she slept. I almost left a letter explaining, but..." His voice broke. "How do you explain the inexplicable? How do I tell them I love them, but I can't live their version of life anymore?" Then I noticed the red marks on his face, a recent bruise, the mark of fingers. "Your father?" I asked, feeling anger rising inside me. Connor nodded. He found me writing the letter. He said I was a disappointment to God, that I chose the path of Satan. A sad smile touched his lips. All I did was say I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I fought the urge to touch him, aware that we needed to start moving. "Are you sure about that, Connor? You can still come back. Say you were confused. Ask for forgiveness." He glanced over his shoulder at the farm, the only home he'd ever known. For a moment, his expression held all the pain of leaving behind not just a place, but an entire identity. "There's no turning back," he finally said, turning to me with renewed determination. "And I don't even want there to be. For the first time in my life, I'm walking towards something, not away." "Then where do we go?" I asked, offering him the first of many choices that lay ahead. "You mentioned Vermont," he replied. "Seems like a good place to start." I gestured north, through the forest. "It's a long walk until the next town. We can catch a bus there." "A bus?" he repeated, the word sounding strange on his lips. "I've never ridden one." "It'll be the first of many firsts," I said with a small smile. "Are you ready for that?" In response, Connor took a determined step into the forest, leaving behind the open field. As the trees enveloped us, I saw his posture change subtly. Shoulders relaxing, head held a little higher. "Hey, Ethan," Connor said suddenly, pausing for a moment. "Are you scared?" The question caught me off guard. "Of what exactly?" "Of the future. Of having made the wrong choice. Of regretting it." I considered the question carefully before answering. Every day, the fear never completely goes away. But I've learned that living your truth, even with fear, is better than existing in a lie. Connor absorbed my words, nodding slowly. "I think that's exactly what I'm doing right now. Choosing the scary truth over the comfortable lie." "And how do you feel?" I asked. He looked up toward where fragments of blue sky peeked through the treetops. For a moment, his face lit up with what I can only describe as peace. Not the peace of having found answers, but the deeper calm of finally asking the right questions. "Free," he replied simply. "Scared, sad, unsure, but finally free." We resumed our walk, each step taking us farther away from the structured life of the Amish community and closer to the unknown world beyond. We had no guarantees, only possibilities. We didn't know if what was blossoming between us would survive the pressures of the outside world, or if our paths would eventually part. The sun now filtered through the trees in dancing patterns of light and shadow. We still had hours of walking ahead before reaching civilization. Connor stumbled over a root, and instinctively, I reached out to steady him. Our fingers intertwined naturally, and this time we didn't let go. That barn had been more than just a shelter from the storm. It had been a temporary sanctuary where two lost souls found each other, even if only for a moment. Now, walking side by side through the forest, I realized that true sanctuary was never a physical place, but the space we created when we finally had the courage to be who we truly are. "You know," Connor said as the distant sound of traffic reached our ears, signaling our approach to civilization, "I never planned on staying in that barn. It was just a place to store hay and tools." I smiled, gently squeezing his hand. "And I never planned on a storm completely changing the course of my life. Do you think it was just a coincidence? Or something more?" he asked, his religious upbringing evident in his question. I paused for a moment before answering. "I believe some storms come to clear the way for something new, and some temporary shelters end up showing us the true meaning of home. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right away. In front of us, the forest began to give way to signs of the town. The world that Connor had never known was waiting to welcome him. With all its wonders and challenges, its beauties and ugliness, its endless possibilities. "I'm ready," he said, as if answering an unspoken question. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get more stories like this. And so, leaving behind the barn that had been our unlikely beginning, we walked together into the unknown. Two different men united not just by our budding affection, but by the shared courage to choose authenticity above all. After all, true sin was never about loving. It was about denying yourself the chance to live fully in the truth.